It's a history lesson, a funny and emotional journey, and a theatrical marathon. I'm Lynn Wagner at the Geffen Playhouse, where audiences are settling in for The Inheritance, Part 1 and 2. It was a Sunday just afternoon when Tony Rodriguez arrived at the Geffen Playhouse. He came prepared.
Tissues.
Because he knew the subject matter was going to hit home.
This week will be the 2-year anniversary of a passing of a dear friend of mine who did die of AIDS. So when this was opening, I'm like, oh, I want to see this and have sort of this experience with a community.
Community is very much at the heart of The Inheritance Part 1 and Part 2, according to director Mike Donahue.
I don't know that I had ever seen a production where I felt able to see and feel myself and my community so deeply and so extraordinarily drawn.
Mike has long been friends with playwright Matthew Lopez and remembers sobbing in his bed as he read an early draft of the scripts. Lights up on Casey Mahaffey years later, reading the scripts on his couch during the pandemic.
And just sobbing my eyes out and laughing hysterically. And I was like, I actually said out loud, I was like, this is an actor's dream.
The Inheritance is an event. 2 plays broken into roughly 6 acts for what is close to 7 hours total. Audiences can digest it over 2 nights or consume it all in one day for what Mike describes as binge-watching live theater.
I think 7 hours sounds like, oh God, 7 hours. But I sit down and plow through 7 hours of Netflix on an evening and don't think anything twice about it.
The number one comment is like, I couldn't believe it. It didn't feel long at all. In fact, I wanted more.
Maybe that's because there's a lot of ground to cover. Friendships, breakups, deaths and weddings, addiction, and deep discussions about the past. The AIDS epidemic, the Stonewall riots, and back even further to early 20th century.
To try to beg the question, what do we owe each other as gay men? As we pass down our stories and our commitment to each other, what does that look like?
It's a question Casey, who married his husband in 2020, has mulled over himself. The Inheritance celebrates the community's victories, but also looks to the future, acknowledging that the progress made by past generations is hardly permanent.
I think we're suddenly in a moment of very real risk and danger about what we might lose.
Over the past few months, yes, months of rehearsal, Mike says the cast has grown into a family, and he's also seen audience members bond with total strangers over the course of the 7-hour show. It's exhausting to perform, Casey admits, but totally worth every second.
We're changing people's lives with this story, and that feels really good.
As for Tony, it was dark by the time he left the theater, still processing everything he had just witnessed.
It is very important, I would say. I'm very moved, and it was very powerful to see it with people.
Tell your story bravely, one character says in Part 1. It's a story worth telling. He may as well have been talking about The Inheritance itself, a story worth telling and a story worth witnessing together.